Popcorn Junkies, welcome to this review of Warfare. This is the new film from, what's co-directed actually, from Alex Garland, he who directed things like Ex Machina, Annihilation, Men, Civil War. Interesting filmmaker. Ex Machina is definitely up there as one of my favourite films. Also a screenwriter who wrote the scripts to 28 Days Later and the forthcoming 28 Years Later. He's co-directed this movie, Warfare, with Ray Mendoza. And Ray Mendoza was a Navy SEAL, a member of the Navy SEAL platoon Alpha 1 from the Iraq War. Now this is a film, as the title suggests, about the Iraq War, or it's about more specifically a platoon. And it's a film that presents the actions that occur in the film, though it's not a continuous take or anything like that. What we see occur in the film is essentially presented in real time. We effectively spend, 96 minutes or thereabouts in the presence of a platoon of soldiers who essentially, in the sort of surrounding aftermath of the Battle of Ramadi, they take occupation of a house. They encourage the Iraqi citizens who live in the house, family that live in the house, to hide. They hide them safely in a sort of bedroom at the rear of the property. And then as American troops, they take over this house. Now, when I saw the trailer for this, I was really kind of troubled and cautious because, and I'm going to have to, unfortunately, for any movie fans who don't like politics and all that kind of stuff, this is an inherently political film. It's about a war in the Middle East, a war that was conducted on fraudulent grounds. Do you remember the dodgy dossier, the weapons of mass destruction that never materialised in Iraq? So it's necessarily political, and this is necessarily parked within a modern, recent war. And so when I watched the trailer, if you add in, our activism and our sort of many discussions and publicising of the atrocities that have gone on in the Israeli-Gaza war, I was struggling to see how I could get on board with the plight of an American platoon, given the sense that America hasn't really garlanded itself in glory, showered itself in sort of, pride, with the way in which it's gone around the world, or its proxies, i.e. Israel, have gone around the world just destroying essentially Arabic culture and Arab countries, all in the name of so-called democracy. What does that actually mean? All in the name of fighting terror. One person's terrorism is potentially another country's form of resistance. And so all of that was kind of loaded into my reaction to the trailer. I wasn't even thinking about how well it was made, how well it was going to be performed, how it was going to be shot, structured, etc. My thinking was, how am I going to actually make myself care? And of course, the cleverness of film, the magic of film, the point of film, the strength of filmmaking versus things like photography or straight journalism and what have you, is that necessarily through characterization, through immediacy, through drama, you do get pulled in and you do care. So this film for me was a surprise. It was a surprise because I found quite quickly I bedded into becoming essentially almost the a visual part of the platoon. I felt like I was one of the team. The camera work is very, very immediate. It's very crisp. It's kind of documentary-like, but it's also very not documentary too. As I say, it's not a real-time continuous take, but the suggestion is there are no elisions of time. We don't have like a nighttime pass or a morning pass. We are with them for 96 minutes with a platoon of approximately, 10 sort of characters as they, proceed to kind of engage in a tiny microscopic part of this enormous Iraqi war. In many regards, the only part of this film that in a sense is kind of, when I say poetic, I mean is kind of not driven just by the action and the immediacy and the need for survival within the harsh realities of conflict, is at the very beginning of the film, where we have a very sort of prolonged and I think quite successful and meaningful kind of sequence, which has been thrown around a lot of social media. It keeps popping up on TikTok and Instagram, what have you, which is a bunch of American soldiers all huddled around a TV and watching that now infamous Eric Prydz' Call on Me MTV video with the beautiful woman doing the sort of gyrating and lots of buttocks and all that kind of stuff. It's a funny opening scene, this, because in a sense it speaks to a time, an era, back in the 2000s, early 2000s. It spoke back to a time where sort of male rehabilitation wasn't a thing. I mean, videos like this, I presume, you know, there are still pop videos made now with beautiful women and their buttocks gyrating all over the place. But this was an awkward watch for me right at the beginning, watching a bunch of men, albeit men that we're going to sort of now, you know, go on a tour of duty with or be in conflict with, in a battle zone with, watching them essentially kind of enjoy and ogle and gyrate and in a sense sort of drool over the wonderful kind of gym instructor in that Call on Me MTV viral hit. I think in many regards, I think I didn't trust it as a sequence, and I think it's a bit of a bum steer at the front of the film, because I thought, a group of men together watching this, would they have just all innocently just been watching and kind of smiling? It was all very benign, it was all very politically correct, and I would be doubtful that it was necessarily not without its kind of more prurient elements, statements, shouts or calls. But it was a moment of unity. It was a moment, I suppose, in many regards to remind us that this is just a group of young men, and a group of young men who are going to war. And if we can park to the side the reasons why certain soldiers or certain individuals, certain men in this age, choose to go into the army, I think it's fair to say and safe to say from the get-go with this film or with any film about World War II or World War I, that more often than not, young men, principally men, but women too, who are sent to war, are often fighting the battles of rich, disconnected, controlling, even in so-called democracies, leaders that have an agenda. They are fighting other people's wars. These aren't the wars of these individual people. And in a sense, the size of any conflict far outweighs the kind of human story of any individual soldier. And I think there's a strong, compelling argument, having had quite a sort of doubtful response to the trailer, thinking, oh, is this just going to be, even if it's propaganda light, is it going to be sort of propaganda-ish in terms of saying, you know, feel for our American troops, feel for them, because essentially they were in a country they shouldn't be. That kind of fell away quite quickly for me, and I was quite surprised that evaporated quite quickly. The enemy, for want of a better expression, you know, the Iraqis, the local Iraqis, are seen through viewfinders, they're seen through the sights of rifles. We see them as potential terrorists or local citizens or not. We do see an Iraqi family, because for me, I think the way in which the locals, the perceived enemy, how they were portrayed in this film was critical. And I don't think, there's one moment where one of the soldiers says, oh, they're getting ready for their jihad. In a weird way, I guess that would have been said, but it didn't feel like it dehumanized the locals. Yes, there's a point where when the shooting starts and the battles flare and bombs and guns and all this kind of stuff and long shootouts occur, there are moments where it begins to feel incredibly like a video game or, you know, a shoot-'em-up video game. But unfortunately, I think war ends up becoming like a shoot-'em-up video game. So that was less an intentional thing. So I think the way in which this film did a good job of dealing with the, if you like, the humanity and ordinariness of the Iraqi family that were sort of in the house that the army takes over, that the platoon takes over, and they sort of usher them into this back room. They're treated with respect. I trust and hope that was the case originally. And they're like a family, just like yours and mine. They weren't caricatured, they weren't stereotyped. And in fact, I would argue when you get to the end of this film, there's a moment or there's a beat at the very end of this film where you are reminded of the carnage and the chaos and the destruction that the Americans and the West leave in their wake. I would go so far as to say that this is a film that's anti-war and certainly isn't interested in promoting the American troops as we need to understand them. I think this is presenting the facts of war, the fact that wars have happened, and I think this does a very good job of not, as much as it can, not buttressing the political stereotypes or the belief that we need to kind of have a real tender understanding for these troops because they're American. What you end up feeling, I think, in this film is just compassion for the Iraqis, the family, the Iraqi country. I mean, not principally, but you feel compassion for these young men. These are young men at the end of the day, whether we like it or not, whether we agree or not with the reason that America's there. These are the men who are sent there, and what they experience is real. So I quite quickly ended up being able to lose that concern. That concern started to sort of evaporate and sort of, you know, filter away quite quickly, which was quite a relief. And then what I felt this film actually became was an incredibly revealing, incredibly moving, incredibly eye-opening film about the sheer exhausting technicalities and detail of conflict and fighting. whether it be down to where do you have your smoke canister in your kit, to the morphine shots that you carry, that every soldier carries amongst them in case someone loses their legs or suffers a severe kind of injury, which means that they're bleeding out massively. There's a lot of non-fighting graft. Yes, there's shooting. Yes, there's, targeting and taking positions and taking shots. But the 75% of what we watch the troops, the soldiers in this platoon do, is administrative, is logistics, is essentially caring for, needing to get up and go for a wee. This was a really clever film in showing the unglamorous bits of intimate warfare that just most films and most kind of portrayals of film just choose to ignore. Whether it be, something as simple as this, which I thought was quite telling. You've got a sniper on a stack of mattresses, brilliantly shown shots. It looks beautiful, shot beautifully. And he's on a pile of mattresses. He's lying on his front. He's got his sights trained on a building opposite. They're reporting back all the movements. They're phoning in the numbers and coordinates of the buildings that people are moving between. The sniper has a notepad. He's drawing little kind of illustrations about who's on which building and in which square. He has an assistant alongside him who's kind of calling in and talking to, central command or whatever you want to call it. But there comes a point where even lying on your front with a gun like that, you're going to get cramped. You need to stretch. And this was a great film for showing those moments, the incidental moments, the ordinary moments of warfare, whether it be pissing in a bottle, getting up and have to go to the corner. Where do you go for a wee when you're in a house surrounded by your enemy, albeit that you've invaded their country? Where do you go for a wee? How do you sort of stretch your back? How do you keep yourself mobile? And this is a film littered with the logistical difficulties of every single conceivable part of conducting a guerrilla-style operation in a foreign country. We really focused in on, I guess, what is he? The navigator. The guy is always working out their coordinates, looking at the maps, phoning in those positions. Then his snipers and his eyes and the radio guy will tell them where they've got kind of, incoming kind of potential enemies. You've got the feed coming from the spy planes or the satellites or drones or whatever are above, looking at the white dots of potential kind of insurgents that are coming to kind of attack the house. You then get a moment where one of them is injured. A surprise attack, a grenade comes in, and then they have to basically most of this film isn't them successfully fighting against an enemy to occupy a house and sort of, in a sense, progress the broader war. They spend 96 minutes, we spend an entirety of time with a bunch of soldiers who occupy a house to just kind of make a base, spend the entirety of the film trying to defend their position. They get attacked, and then they try to evacuate two of their injured personnel, or one of their injured personnel. They try to evacuate. Some of them get killed, some of them get their legs blown off, and then we have the intricacies of getting another platoon in to rescue this platoon. And I was left thinking by the end of this film, I was thinking, fucking hell, the amount of manpower, the amount of armory, the number of soldiers, the number of lives at risk, the amount of stress and trauma that has gone into not even achieving part of the military goal, just getting out. This is a film of them getting out. Yes, there's warfare in it, but this isn't a sort of active attack. This is a defensive maneuver, and we see a platoon under duress, and we see the psychological impact of this, because when the first improvised explosive device kind of blows up the kind of armored vehicle that's come to kind of get them out in the first place, there's a moment in the middle of this film where the smoke, the fog of war quite literally kicks in. We cut between various soldiers, the lack of sound, the disorientation of sight and hearing. You can then start to hear just the click, click, even as they're all coming around on the floor of gunshots. So not only have you been bombed by an IED, as you come round, you're still under attack, you're still being shot. You look to your left, you see one of the Iraqi soldiers who's working for you. So you've got the Iraqi army working for you. And this was what was very clever about this film. It didn't shy away from showing essentially the way in which the American army would use human shields in the form of the Iraqi soldiers. Because when there were moments where if you stepped outside the door, you were definitely going to get shot. You were definitely at risk of being killed. those moments, those first steps out were given to the Iraqi soldiers. And there was a couple of moments where the Iraqi army soldiers were like, what the fuck are they doing? If they send us out there, we're going to die. And they knew they were going to die. So they had a much worse position to the Americans. And though it didn't politicize that and it didn't labor the point, it was just a matter of fact part of it. They were a sort of second class citizen within this platoon. And the American soldiers used them as such. Go and hold upstairs. Go and make sure you keep secure downstairs. Go out to the armoured vehicle and make sure it's clear. It's like, well, hang on, if we do that to get you out of here, we're going to die. It didn't shy away from that. It also didn't shy away from the sheer shock, the shell shock. We think of World War I when we think of being shell-shocked. All of the soldiers in this platoon are certainly the ones that have gone out the front to try and escape and are hit by the IED. Shell shock manifests itself in all of these. This is about survival. This is about desperation. This is a film about the intricacies and the skill set of soldiers having to work quickly and tirelessly whilst they themselves are managing a state of shock. I thought that was the most excellent aspect of the ensemble performance, was the way in which each of the actors managed to really portray that sense of they were all labouring under their own war-weary shell-shockedness. And yet at the same time, they were still having to dig deep, pull a gun out and aim and shoot and protect, or pull out a morphine jab and apply it correctly, or, tourniquet one of their legs, or try and keep them alive, or talk about how they were worried about two of the injured people. And Joseph Quinn's character's like, I'm not the one you're most injured about, am I? And you're thinking, oh my God, how do they psychologically keep these guys alive psychologically as well as physically and biologically? It's like this was about the work, the nuts and bolts of survival, not just the guns, the shootouts, the bombs and all the kit and all the tech. This was grimy, this was sandy, this was dusty, this was dry, this was harsh, it was relentless. And what you were left at the end of it was, yes, you felt for these boys. You felt for these boys who'd gone through this. But you didn't feel for these boys in a sort of jingoistic American, yeah, hey, yee-haw, this is why we fight battles around the world. I was left thinking as they came out of the house at the end of this film, once they're finally evacuated. You're reminded and you're shown very cleverly, actually, through some very subtle shots. There's a sudden resounding silence once the kind of, all of the kind of fight out, shoot out, violence, explosions. Once they finally manage to get themselves out, I won't say who dies, if they die, and what happens to who. But there's a sort of resounding silence. It's like after the event, the aftermath, and then the Iraqi family come out of the back bedroom, who've been held there all along, and they're walking around their decimated house, and you're left thinking, as a viewer, just as the Iraqis would have been, what the fuck was the point of that? They gained nothing. All they did was they managed to occupy a house, terrify an entire two families of Iraqis, become a target, try to survive, lose members of their platoon, try to save members of their platoon, and then were evacuated out. In the meantime, they've had to use fighter jets flying down the road. I didn't realise this was a thing that they did. We need a show of strength. They'd be radioing in when they were under attack or there were too many bullets coming in. They'd be like, we need a show of strength. And so what they would do is they would scramble a fighter jet to fly down the road so that it creates a sort of sonic boom that left everyone shell-shocked. And so by the end of this film, you too are, you understand why they've got the 1,000-yard stare and they are all in pieces. And yet even in the in pieces state, they're still having to execute these kind of skill sets and tasks and call in kind of coordinates and evacuate and structure the order by which people will leave the building safely in order to get into the armoured vehicles to be evacuated. Are you going out and going left? Are you going out and going right? The nuts and bolts of what it means to be a soldier are so expertly shown in this. And as I say, it wasn't a jingoistic piece of propaganda. I would say it was an incredibly compelling piece of visceral filmmaking to once again demonstrate the utter pointlessness of the vast majority of military exercises. What did they gain from this? Nothing. What did the overall war gain in Iraq? Nothing. So it isn't actually, for those who I think are worried that this could be just a piece of propaganda of the American army, it really isn't. It isn't a sort of jingoistic piece of America. It didn't bang the drum of America at all. It banged the drum of the futility of war. And it did it from a perspective where we have, as a Western nation, I guess, and Hollywood, access to the soldiers who could tell us what it was like. And for that fact alone, I think this is a priceless piece of filmmaking that should be shown in the context of demonstrating why we should do everything we can at all costs to avoid conflict. The performances are brilliant. I mean, I'll just give a shout out. Joseph Quinn is excellent. They're all great. Charles Melton is brilliant as the sort of the commander of the second platoon that comes in to kind of, if you like, mop up the mess. D'Pharaoh Woon-A-Tai is Ray Mendoza, the communicator. He's brilliant. He's sensational. Will Poulter is fabulous. He loses himself in his sort of a psychological state towards the end. He's great. Cosmo Jarvis, Kit Connor. A particular shout out actually to Michael Gandolfini. He was really good too. It was just excellent, and it didn't overplay the kind of camaraderie either. When the second platoon arrived, and one of the original platoon members is on the floor with shredded legs, this new platoon guy who arrived 1 minute ago, come on guys, we can do this. He kept knocking the eviscerated feet or legs of the injured guy, and then he did it 2 or 3 times, and like the other guys had to say, watch where you're knocking, watch what you're doing. And I thought that detail alone I thought was really realistic and pragmatic. The idea that even you can be so sort of a lumbering idiot and fool flopping around. They made mistakes, they were naive, they were innocent in many regards. They were just trying their best, and there was no politicization of the enemy. There was no diminishing of the enemy, other than how diminished the Iraqis were by the fact of the war happening in the first place. So I can't stress enough that this really isn't a bit of American imperial propagandist stuff. It really isn't. It's a really close-up, warts and all, glaringly horrible portrait of the exhausting details, and most of them administrative details and technical details and logistical details of surviving in an intense guerrilla warfare scenario. It reminded me at times when they were waiting around. There's a famous adage in filmmaking of hurry up and wait. And I thought this one did a really good job in its 96 minutes of demonstrating those moments where they were just waiting. And you kept, as a viewer, you're thinking someone's going to get shot through the head in a minute. Someone's just going to get shot through the head. And it just, the ticking clock, the wait, the build. Excellent piece of filmmaking. I'd give this 98 out of 100.